When a determined young woman named Alice, scarred by a tragic fire, ventures to the 1880s Arizona territory, seeking a new life, she never imagines the cruel stares and biting ridicule awaiting her. Mocked and turned away by the man who invited her, all her hopes seem crushed. But just as she's about to surrender to despair, a wealthy rancher named Benjamin intervenes, challenging the town's merciless judgment. In that single moment, everything changes, leading to a heart-stopping confrontation, secret alliances, and a dawning respect that neither of them expected. How does Alice transform pitying gazes into admiration? Will Benjamin risk the opinions of high society to defend her honor? And can a small desert community learn to see past scars, listen to the complete story, to witness each twist, revelation, and act of courage that brings them closer to a destiny more profound than either imagined? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support empowers us to continue sharing inspiring frontier tales of resilience and love against all odds. A lone stagecoach rattled to a stop at the edge of Winfield Flats, an 1880s Arizona territory town, caught between the desert's heat and the promise of new railroads. From within the coach, Alice Harper stepped cautiously onto the dusty ground. She wore a simple dress of dull green cotton, and her left cheek bore the jagged scar that had been her companion since the fire that claimed both her home and her family. With her life savings hidden in a small reticule and a handful of letters that promised a fresh start, Alice had traveled cross-country answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride. The man behind the advertisement, Arnold Reed, claimed to run a successful mercantile. He had written kindly, worded letters about building a life together, describing Winfield Flats as a welcoming place where appearances mattered less than industriousness. Yet as soon as Alice began walking the short distance to the local boarding house, she sensed that the real town might be far less gracious. Gawkers halted in mid-conversation to stare, their eyes fixating on her scar. A few whispered behind half-raised hands, uncertain whether to pity her or mock her. Feeling her face grow warm, Alice pressed her fingertips to the scar as if she could hide it from their view. She found the boarding house that her future husband had recommended, an unassuming two-story adobe with a weathered wooden sign reading Mrs. Addison's Lodgings. Inside, the walls gave off a faint odor of sage and old varnish, but the parlor was kept tidy with crocheted doilies on every side table. Mrs. Millicent Addison herself emerged to greet Alice, a silver-haired widow whose gentle, curious eyes took in the newcomer's scar without recoil. She led Alice upstairs to a modest room that contained a narrow bed, a single window, and a chipped bureau. "This'll be your room until Mr. Reed sets a date for the wedding," Mrs. Addison said, her tone carefully neutral. Alice tried to smile, but a tight knot of nerves prevented it. Something about Mrs. Addison's measured words hinted that Alice's arrival was already a matter of local gossip. Indeed, it took less than a day for those rumors to prove themselves real. Stepping out to purchase a few essentials from the market the next morning, Alice felt every eye follow her. A cluster of local girls snickered loud enough that she heard them debating who would ever marry a woman with such a face. And what if the children inherited her scars somehow? That last remark cut deeply, as though the cruel words had sunk razor-sharp into her flesh. But she gathered her meager supplies, tucked them into a basket, and returned to the boarding house with as much composure as she could muster. True to the letters, Arnold Reed arrived exactly 2 days after Alice did, but with none of the warmth his writing had suggested. Meeting her in Mrs. Addison's parlor, he took one glance at her scar and blanched, stepping back as though something rancid hovered in the air. All the practiced politeness in the world could not hide his distaste. Quietly, he explained his situation. Yes, he had written to her, but nowhere in her replies did she mention a disfigurement. His mercantile, he said, was a place of steady traffic and respectable clientele, and he could not risk letting the face of his business be a woman who might frighten or discomfit the customers. Politely but coldly, he returned the ring he had sent in his final letter, an unremarkable band that she'd carried in her reticule all this time. He offered to pay her way back to Boston, telling her it would be best for both of them if they parted before gossip spread further. Alice refused his money. She would not bear the indignity of being pitied by the very man who had coaxed her across the country. Mr. Reed departed swiftly, leaving her in a swirl of shame, anger, and heartbreak. Mrs. Addison, overhearing much of it, pressed a comforting cup of tea into Alice's trembling hands. Though the hot liquid soothed her nerves, the cruelty of the situation burned deeper than any physical scar. Holed up in her tiny room for 3 days, Alice battled doubt. She had spent what little she had left traveling here. Going back east meant facing new forms of ridicule and no ready work. She had excelled at sewing and needlework in her old life, but Boston's shops were oversaturated with more presentable candidates. At least in Winfield Flats, she might find some meager job, Mrs. Addison tried to encourage her, suggesting that this region was more open-minded than the East, that a strong, capable woman could forge her own destiny. Yet whenever Alice ventured outside for errands, she felt the sting of onlookers' glances, as though a brand glowed on her skin, labeling her as an outcast. On her fourth morning, something changed. Venturing to the open-air market, Alice was cornered by a group of local ladies among them. Beatrice Webb, a prominent rancher's wife, known for her vicious tongues about reputation. They surrounded her near the produce stand, forcing her to drop her basket and scattering vegetables across the dusty ground. Beatrice clucked her tongue, feigning regret. She loudly proclaimed that some people should know when they're not wanted, and that poor Arnold had been deceived by Alice's letters. One more barbed remark about the hideous scar caused Alice's simmering anger to break through. She retorted that her so-called hideousness hadn't stopped her from trying to make an honest living, something many around here couldn't claim. Beatrice's eyes flashed with fury, the entire market going dead silent as onlookers awaited the social fallout. That was precisely the moment Benjamin Shaw appeared on horseback. In a confident yet understated manner, the tall, sun-hardened rancher dismounted and strode through the crowd to collect Alice's dropped vegetables, placing them into his wide-brimmed hat. Turning to the ladies, he coolly called out their hypocrisy, how they preached Christian kindness, yet mocked a stranger who had done them no wrong. A hush followed, and not even Beatrice Webb dared speak up. Benjamin Shaw handed Alice back her vegetables, introducing himself with a slight tilt of his hat. His dark eyes exuded understanding rather than revulsion. He asked if she wanted further assistance, shaken but grateful. Alice accompanied him away from the stairs, and he gently suggested they talk at a small cafe near the old church. Over cups of coffee, he listened intently to her story. Then, without condescension, he offered a potential solution. His ranch, Shaw's Crossing, was large with a main house that needed managing, and workers who required organized meal schedules. He had come to town hoping to hire a housekeeper and general overseer for the domestic side of ranch life. Alice was caught off guard by the spontaneous offer. Why hire a complete stranger? More pointedly, why hire her with a scar that made the entire town see her as unfit for polite society? Benjamin answered calmly that he judged people by their backbone and willingness to do the job, not by appearance. He saw in her the courage it took to stand up to a group of gossips without fleeing. Sometimes, he said, the strongest hearts bear the deepest marks. He told her to consider his proposal, suggesting that if she found it unbearable in Winfield Flats, she should head out to his ranch where differences among the staff were accepted, shaken by gratitude and suspicion alike. Alice returned to Mrs. Addison's lodging that evening. She found it difficult to sleep, the rancher's face looming in her thoughts. She had grown used to men flinching at her scar or ignoring her entirely. But not once had Benjamin Shaw's gaze faltered from her eyes to that disfigurement. When Mrs. Addison heard of the job offer, she was delighted, praising Benjamin Shaw's fairness. She insisted that Alice's best chance at forging independence might indeed lie out there on the open range, not in a small-minded mercantile. Alice decided she would at least hear more before committing. But the very next morning, a neatly written contract arrived at the boarding house. It was formal, stipulating lodging in a comfortable suite within Shaw's Crossing, a monthly wage, and basic duties ranging from housekeeping to light bookkeeping. Every line gave Alice a glimpse of a real future. After years of feeling worthless, the notion that her intelligence and perseverance were valued left her simultaneously thrilled and terrified. With trembling hands, she set the contract aside, torn between wanting to accept and fearing that doing so would only stoke further gossip. It took 2 more days and a heartfelt conversation with Mrs. Addison to persuade Alice she should not let gossip paralyze her. At dawn, on the 3rd day, she accepted the contract, signing her name in spiky script, as Mrs. Addison signed as witness. The older woman beamed. "I made a similar decision years back," she said, setting aside the pen. "Came here alone as a widow, determined to live life by my own rules." Never regretted it. Alice hoped she too would have no regrets. She packed her modest belongings, said goodbye to the boarding house that had served as both a harbor and a place of heartbreak, and made her way to the small rig that Benjamin Shaw had sent for her. The driver introduced himself as William Parker, the ranch foreman, a tall, broad-shouldered man of African descent who looked entirely at ease in this desert environment. He greeted her with respect, tipping his worn hat in helping her load her trunk. The journey to Shaw's Crossing took them across miles of sun-baked plains. Occasional clusters of cacti and scraggly mesquite trees broke the monotony. Parker casually mentioned they had a reliable spring on the property, which allowed certain trees and crops to flourish. Hence the name Crossing, he explained. It's where water meets the old cattle trails. By mid-morning, the ranch came into view, a sprawling adobe hacienda with wide porches and roofed walkways, a bunkhouse and stable to one side and corrals stretching beyond. The main house, the foreman pointed out, was built up over a decade room by room in a style that blended southwestern adobe with eastern influences. As soon as Alice stepped down from the wagon, she noticed the subdued hustle of ranch life. People scurried between tasks, fixing fence posts, carrying sacks of feed, cleaning tack. Nearly everyone nodded or smiled in greeting. A few came up to introduce themselves. She felt her unease beginning to lift, true. They did glance at her scar, but it was not the first thing that shaped their attitude. This was a place of labor and mutual respect, not a parlor of delicate sensibilities. Stepping inside the main house, Alice was immediately greeted by Rosa Delgado, the ranch cook, whose bright expression and quick melodic Spanish indicated a sense of camaraderie among staff. Rosa insisted on showing Alice her new quarters, a small but cozy suite with a private bedroom, a small sitting area, and direct access to the kitchen corridor. Senor Shaw wants you close to the heart of the house, Rosa teased, so you can keep an eye on us troublemakers. The next few days were a whirlwind of introductions and new routines. There was Eduardo, the stable hand who spoke little English, but handled the horses with gentle expertise, and Marjorie, a part-time gardener who tended the herb beds behind the house. Alice found the ranch's old housekeeping ledger full of neat columns that indicated when bed linens were changed, which stores had been drawn upon for flour or sugar, and how wages were divided. Checking these records became her primary duty, ensuring the main house ran smoothly and that no department lacked what it needed. Though unaccustomed to the dusty environment, Alice reveled in the sense of autonomy. She woke early every morning to help Rosa plan meals, then oversaw the cleaning staff, double-checked accounts, and even took part in daily rounds with William Parker to note any special requests from the ranch hands. Benjamin Shaw, for his part, seemed to hover at a polite distance. She occasionally glimpsed him heading out to the far fields on his black gelding or conferring with Parker about an incoming shipment of supplies. They exchanged cordial greetings during mealtimes or in passing. There were stolen moments, though brief spells, when he would pause to ask how she was settling in. His unwavering gaze and gentle voice always made her stomach tighten, with a strange mixture of comfort and anticipation. Yet she reminded herself that hers was strictly an employment role. No illusions of romance would flourish, especially not after her fiasco in Winfield Flats. But the ranch itself was deeply healing. Compared to the stifling atmosphere of the boarding house and the scornful eyes on Winfield's main street, Shaw's Crossing was an environment built on cooperation. People of diverse backgrounds found common purpose here, reinforcing the idea that synergy was more valuable than upholding some arbitrary notion of proper society. Among them, Alice began to feel more than just accepted. She felt crucial. She showed Rosa how to adapt certain recipes for the rancher's robust appetites, introduced a new system for labeling storeroom items, and created a roster so that laundry days and supply runs could be scheduled without clashing. Before long, the staff were praising her efficiency. Those outside the ranch, though, were not so quick to adapt. On her next trip into Winfield Flats for supplies, she heard fresh gossip at the Mercantile this time, about her living under Benjamin Shaw's roof with no chaperone in sight. The clerk behind the counter raised a brow upon seeing her, but maintained a veneer of civility. When she returned to the wagon, arms laden with sacks of flour, she found two middle-aged women whispering behind a water trough, smirking at the scandalous housekeeper who thought she could snag the region's wealthiest landowner. The bitterness in their tone left Alice trembling again. Worried that these rumors would affect Benjamin's standing, she told William Parker as much, confiding her concern that she might tarnish the ranch's reputation. The foreman just shrugged. Mr. Shaw's never cared what folks like. That say, he told her, he hires who he wants, does business with who he trusts, and that's all. Yet the gossip pressed on. By mid-spring, the local newspaper carried a piece from none other than Beatrice Webb, condemning the inappropriateness of an unmarried woman employed in such an intimate setting. Alice came across it by accident, spotting her name in a paragraph that questioned her moral character. Mortified, she tried to hide the paper from the rest of the ranch staff, but Rosa Delgado discovered it. Furious, Rosa took the newspaper straight to Benjamin Shaw, slamming it down in front of him. The next thing Alice knew, the rancher stormed into the main house's small office where she was balancing the monthly accounts. Alice. "I'm sorry," he said, his expression thunderous with anger. "You shouldn't have to face this nonsense." Gently but firmly, he declared that her place at Shaw's Crossing was secure no matter what small-minded townsfolk thought or wrote. He'd built this operation by ignoring exactly that brand of prejudice, and he wasn't about to stop now. Overwhelmed, Alice could only nod. She recognized that, behind his fierce defense of her, lay a deeper personal code, one that valued loyalty and genuine effort far more than superficial standards of beauty or social acceptance. Thunderheads brooded over the horizon one late afternoon, threatening to drench the ranch. The incoming storm matched Alice's mood. Despite her growing sense of belonging at Shaw's Crossing, the local gossip still clung to her mind like burrs. She couldn't stop replaying the pointed remarks from Winfield Flats. Worried that she was jeopardizing Benjamin's reputation and possibly his business, she finally decided to address the matter directly. She found him in the old library, which functioned as a study for ranch records. He stood with his broad shoulders turned toward the window, watching the first flashes of lightning in the distance. "Mr. Shaw," she began, voice trembling, "I need to talk to you about the rumors, about how people are saying my presence here is improper." He turned from the window, a frown creasing his brow as soon as he saw her tense posture. She quickly explained, "I don't want to bring shame on this ranch. You hired me to manage the domestic side, not to cause trouble. If you think it would be best for me to go—" He silenced her with a firm wave of his hand. "Stop right there, Miss Harper," he said quietly, though there was an edge in his tone. "The only trouble I see is coming from those who judge you without knowing a thing about your heart or your work." She felt tears prick her eyes. "But they keep whispering that you're running some scandalous situation that I—" Benjamin took a step closer. She could smell leather and the faint tang of soap on him. "I've lived in Winfield Flats long enough to know how folks operate. Some will always find a reason to tear down anyone who doesn't fit their mold. You have a scar. I run a ranch with a diverse staff together. We make easy gossip." His gaze dropped to the side of her face where the scar stretched. Gently, as though asking permission, he lifted a hand to hover near it. She caught her breath, half expecting revulsion, but his eyes showed only compassion. "They see only what's on the surface," he said. "I see the woman who organizes my ledgers, cares for her staff, stands tall even when half the town tries to break her spirit." His words felt like a salve, though they also stoked a longing she'd never admitted. She ducked her head. "I'm not as strong as you think," she whispered. He shook his head. "Strength isn't about never feeling hurt. It's about deciding to keep going anyway, to keep believing in your worth." Outside, thunder cracked, rain beginning to rattle the windows. Alice realized she was trembling, tears threatening to spill. This tension within her was not simply about gossip. It was about how she'd come to value his approval, how her heart had begun twisting in odd ways whenever he was near. "I just don't want you to lose business over me," she said, voice quavering. "You've built so much here." And he reached out and took her hand, surprising her. "I built it on principles, Alice. If I turn my back on them now, it'll mean I was never really dedicated to fairness and loyalty. Do you think that's the kind of man I am?" She could only shake her head. Silence throbbed between them, the storm's crescendo outside matching the charged atmosphere within. In that moment, she found herself wanting to confess the swirl of emotions she felt, but the raw vulnerability in her own chest made her hesitate. Instead, she mustered a watery smile, murmuring, "Thank you for your belief in me, Mr. Shaw." He squeezed her hand once, then let go with visible reluctance. "Benjamin," he corrected softly. "If you're comfortable, I'd like you to call me Benjamin." Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. Finally, she nodded. "All right, Benjamin," she managed, feeling the name settle on her tongue like a promise. Lightning flared through the window, revealing the fierce expression on his face. She realized she wasn't the only one trying to hold back unspoken feelings. By the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the sky impossibly clear. The gossip in town raged on, of course, but within Shaw's Crossing, no one cared. Staff came and went with easy smiles, and the days continued in routine accounts. To balance fence lines, to inspect meal rosters, to arrange. Yet something new pulsed under every interaction between Alice and Benjamin, an awareness that neither quite knew how to handle. She caught him glancing at her across the dinner table, a question in his eyes. She found herself daydreaming about the shape of his hands guiding her on a horse, or the timbre of his voice in the quiet of the library. It was both thrilling and terrifying. One day, William Parker asked her to help check something in the stable records. It was a small job, just verifying the feed portions for certain horses. As she scanned the notations, she heard the gentle whickering of a copper-coated mare in a separate stall. Parker explained that Benjamin had rescued the horse after finding it tangled in barbed wire out on the range. Some folks said she was too wild, too scarred to be worth it, Parker noted. But you know how the boss is. Intrigued, Alice peered over the stall door, noticing a long mark on the horse's flank. The parallel to her own situation was unmistakable. Something or someone deemed too damaged by the outside world, yet given a second chance by Benjamin Shaw. Parker's grin was knowing. He's determined to gentle her. Says she's got spirit, just needs time to trust again. That same evening, Alice and Rosa Delgado were cleaning up after dinner when the mare's name came up. Rosa rolled her eyes fondly, telling how Benjamin had spent hours each day with that horse whispering encouragement, letting her come around at her own pace, Rosa teased. He's got a soft spot for any creature that's been dealt a rough hand, man, woman, or horse. The implication hung in the air. Alice's cheeks warmed, but she quickly busied herself with gathering dishes. Even so, her heart pounded at the notion that she and that injured mare might share more in common than she had realized. Summer burned across the desert making midday chores, especially grueling. Yet Alice found that rising before dawn to help prepare breakfast, then tackling her administrative tasks in the cooler hours was surprisingly rewarding. She continued to refine the ranch's household systems, earning grateful accolades from every corner. The financial ledgers, once scrawled haphazardly, now gleamed with neat lines and color-coded tabs. The bunkhouse laundry schedule no longer clashed with Rosa's cooking supply runs. Even the foreman's office tapped into her organizational approach, letting her coordinate horse vaccination, timetables with feed inventories. In the middle of all this progress, an unwelcome column in the local newspaper reappeared under opinions by Beatrice Webb, ridiculing Mr. Shaw's new progressive household, all but calling Alice a harlot. The staff found the piece pinned to the notice board at the post office, likely by some busybody wanting to stir trouble. Alice braced for the worst. Instead, she was met with a wave of staunch loyalty. William Parker declared that if Mrs. Webb ever set foot on the ranch, he'd personally escort her off the property. Rosa Delgado threatened to sling chili peppers at her. Even Eduardo, usually quiet, muttered something in Spanish about sending her packing on a donkey. The unwavering support made tears prick at Alice's eyes, but she tried to keep her emotions steady. A few nights later, after finishing the day's ledgers, she wandered outside to catch a breeze. The sky was a deep cobalt, spangled with stars. She found Benjamin by the corral, quietly leaning against the fence as the copper mare, now known as Mirabelle, circled inside. He offered a soft greeting. She joined him, the two of them watching the horse's fluid movements in companionable silence. She's making progress, Benjamin noted. Still spooks easily, but she doesn't tremble when I approach anymore. Alice smiled. Perhaps she just needed someone patient to see past the scars. He flashed a reflective look her way, responding, Exactly. They spoke in hushed tones about the day's tasks. As the conversation lulled, Alice summoned her courage. Why do you do it? She asked quietly, nodding to the horse. Spend so much time coaxing an animal others deem not worth saving. He considered the question, eyes never leaving Mirabelle. When I was younger, I fought in the war, he said, voice subdued, saw men left behind, if they weren't deemed fit enough to continue, saw others overlooked because they didn't match some standard of worth. I decided then that if I ever had the chance to give someone or some creature a second shot, I'd do it. A knot formed in Alice's throat. It's admirable, she managed. His gaze met hers in the dim moonlight. It's not about admiration. It's about what kind of world I want to see. She found herself wanting to touch his hand, to let him know she understood, but self-consciousness froze her. Instead, she asked, was that war experience what led you to build Shaw's Crossing, the way you did with workers from all backgrounds? He nodded, explaining how, after the war, he realized that unity and compassion brought out the best in people. I didn't want an empire founded on fear or divisiveness, he said. Better to have a ranch built on respect. Night air filled the silence between them, a warm hush that carried the faint scents of sage and horses. Benjamin finally turned fully toward her, resting his forearms on the fence. I'm not blind, he murmured. I see how hard the gossip weighs on you. But your presence here has made the entire ranch stronger. Don't let a few petty tongues rob you of your worth. Alice, moved by his sincerity, she swallowed hard. I'm trying. He nodded as though comprehending more than she said. Keep trying, he whispered. Because from where I stand, you're remarkable. The sincerity in his voice filled her chest with a dangerous sense of hope. She found herself wanting to lean in to let him draw her into an embrace. And for a moment, she thought she saw that same desire flicker in his eyes. But he turned away, clearing his throat. It's late, Mirabelle, and I have done enough for today. You should rest. She understood the unspoken tension that both beckoned and held them apart. Respecting it, she gave him a small smile. Good night, Benjamin. He responded with equal softness. Good night, Alice. She returned to her quarters with a mind too busy to allow immediate sleep. His mention of remarkable echoed in her thoughts. How long had it been since anyone called her that without irony or pity? The sense of acceptance at Shaw's Crossing had chipped away her defenses, revealing a yearning she'd almost forgotten how to feel. She feared heartbreak, especially after the fiasco with Arnold Reed, but something told her that Benjamin's sincerity was of a different stripe entirely. One blazing afternoon, news circulated that Benjamin's sister, Caroline Hill, would be visiting from San Francisco. A woman of considerable social standing, Caroline was known to have polished the Shaw family name in high society circles after the war. Word in Winfield Flats suggested she might attempt to fix what she viewed as her brother's eccentric ways, particularly the rumor that he was entangled with a scarred housekeeper. This spurred Beatrice Webb and her coterie to plan a formal dinner, hoping to recruit Caroline as an ally in restoring proper reputations. When the day of Caroline's arrival came, a fierce desert storm rolled in, delaying her stagecoach. Meanwhile, an urgent matter arose on the ranch. A newly acquired herd threatened to stampede into a dry gulch if the thunder and lightning spooked them. Without hesitation, Benjamin led William Parker, Eduardo, and others out to redirect the animals. Word reached the main house that he might need additional help. Despite being told to stay safe inside, Alice threw on a riding skirt, Rosa Delgado's hasty alteration, and saddled one of the gentler horses. She had been practicing riding in the early mornings under Benjamin's guidance. Though not an expert, she felt confident enough to be of some assistance. She found him near the south fence, shouting commands to keep the agitated cattle from flooding into a narrow wash that would become a death trap once the storm water raced in. Lightning flashed, revealing his grim expression. He spotted Alice at once, eyes flaring with alarm. "Why are you out here?" he yelled over the roar. She pushed aside her fear, guiding her horse closer. "I can help." Together they maneuvered along the herd's flank. Sheets of rain hammered down quickly, turning the soil to mud. Alice's heart drummed in her ears. She recalled every riding lesson, every tip about body posture, and gentle pressure on the reins. The thunder boomed, and one of the lead steers panicked, attempting to bolt. She and Benjamin rode in tandem, expertly blocking its path. Slowly the herd turned away from the wash, moving to safer ground. But the next flash of lightning spooked her mount, which reared violently. For an instant, she lost her seat, visions of hitting the ground swirling in her mind. Benjamin was there in seconds, grabbing her reins, steadying both horse and rider through sheer force of will. He shouted her name, panic raw in his tone. She managed to stammer, "I'm fine, though." Her heart felt ready to explode. Reassured, he guided the entire herd along with the men a good half-mile away to a protected stretch of higher pasture. The ride back to the main house was as tense as it was drenching. By the time they dismounted, the storm had mostly passed, leaving behind thick mud and a swirl of mist. As they stepped under the porch overhang, lightning flared one last time, illuminating the relief etched across Benjamin's face. He grabbed her shoulders, searching her eyes. "When I saw your horse rear up, He didn't finish, but she read in his expression that seeing her hurt would have devastated him. She placed a hand on his soaked sleeve. "I'm all right, truly. You taught me well." Rainwater dripped off them, pooling at their feet, but in that moment, they were alone in the hush of the porch, hearts pounding from adrenaline and concern. His gaze dropped to her mouth. She took in his damp hair, the lines of his face etched deeper by worry. He leaned in, and for one electrifying second, she thought he might kiss her. But the front door slammed open, revealing Caroline Hill, who had arrived despite the storm. She stood wide-eyed, taking in the scene, her brother inches away from a housekeeper, both dripping wet, clearly in the midst of something intimate. A flicker of disapproval and confusion crossed her refined features before she schooled her expression into polite neutrality. Benjamin released Alice's shoulders reluctantly and moved to greet his sister, Caroline, he said, stepping forward. "I didn't expect you until the weather cleared." She cast a quick glance at Alice, who tried not to flush under the scrutiny. The stage driver forged ahead. Caroline replied, voice crisp with that faint Eastern accent. She had the impeccable poise of a city matron. The lines at her eyes suggested both maturity and a keen sense of judgment. I see you've been busy with ranch emergencies as always. The tension was palpable. Caroline's gaze swept between them, lingering on Alice's scar. She offered a taut smile. You must be Miss Harper, Benjamin's new employee. Alice nodded, water still dripping from her hair. Yes, Mrs. Hill. Pleased to meet you. With a curt nod, Caroline turned back to her brother. We should talk privately. Alice took that as her cue to slip inside and find Rosa Delgado for dry clothes. As she retreated, she heard the low rumble of Caroline's voice, no doubt questioning exactly what she had stumbled upon. By late evening, the ranch's staff was all abuzz with the rumor that Caroline Hill might disapprove of everything about Shaw's Crossing. The next morning, a hush hung over the house as Caroline toured the premises, noting the diverse staff, the informal routines, and the closeness between her brother and a scarred housekeeper. The stage for a confrontation was clearly set. Yet around midday, a telegram arrived indicating that the local bank had requested an earlier meeting regarding an expansion loan. Benjamin sought for the ranch. This meeting would require Caroline's social clout, along with Benjamin's business acumen, to sway the directors. As Caroline read the telegram, her lips pursed in distaste. Some crisis had developed and their presence was demanded in town. Privately, Benjamin informed Alice that if the bank questioned the ranch's decency, it might hamper the entire deal. They want old money respectability, he said with a grim edge. This territory is changing, and not everyone likes it. If that made his sister a needed ally, it also meant Alice Harper was a liability in certain eyes. Despite that tension, the ranch needed immediate tasks done, so life carried on. Alice oversaw the next day's meal plan, while Benjamin rode out to check the damage from the storm. Caroline, meanwhile, took tea with Parker and Delgado. Evidently interviewing them about how the ranch was run, by dinner time, Caroline's mood had grown pensive. She requested a private conversation with Alice in the library. With a calm resignation, Alice agreed, suspecting a lecture about how she should quietly resign for the good of the Carter. Know the Shaw family name? Caroline Hill stood by the library's large window, gazing at the orchard that sprawled in the distance, nourished by a hidden spring. Despite the withering desert around it, the orchard thrived, a living testament to Benjamin's stubborn belief in growth amid adversity. The parallel to Alice's own journey was not lost on her. As she entered, Caroline gestured for her to close the door. Turning with measured grace, Miss Harper, it seems we have matters to discuss. Folding her hands, Alice braced herself for criticism. Caroline spoke with an unyielding calm. I admire what my brother has built, though I suspect he's tested the limits of social acceptance. But this arrangement, the rumors in Winfield Flats, he's risking more than his own comfort. The bank meeting tomorrow might shape the entire ranch's future. Alice swallowed. I understand. I never intended to cause harm. Caroline's expression flickered. That's clear. But be honest, you must have known that placing yourself under his roof would bring talk, especially given your scar and the circumstances of your arrival. Despite her polite veneer, Caroline's words stung. Still, Alice gathered her courage. Benjamin offered me a job. I was desperate for work. I never hid my face from him. If people choose to assume scandal, that's on them. Caroline's lips thinned. People can be cruel, and it's not always a matter of assumption. Society has its own rules, whether fair or not. My father and mother spent years forging connections that kept the Shaw name in respectable circles. Benjamin parted ways with some of that, choosing a frontier ranch over city comforts. But if you think the name no longer matters, you're mistaken. It matters to bankers, to local leaders, to investors. A tension-laden pause settled, broken only by the ticking clock. Carolyn pressed on. He needs that loan for ranch expansion. If the directors fear scandal, they may refuse. Are you prepared for that burden? Knowing your presence might cost Shaw's Crossing the capital it needs. Alice's chest tightened. He told me he'd rather lose money than integrity. Caroline's eyes narrowed, though not unkindly. He's always been idealistic, but I'm not so sure it's wise. If the ranch suffers, so do all the men and women who work here. A faint trembling overcame Alice's hands. She pictured all the staff whose livelihoods depended on the ranch's success, the trust they had placed in Benjamin. I don't want them harmed, she whispered. But I can't pretend my face is normal, nor can I run away. This is the one place I've felt truly valued. Caroline's gaze softened a fraction. You love him, don't you? The question was so direct that Alice's breath caught. She couldn't speak for a moment. Caroline read her silence. Then you must see the predicament. If your relationship is personal, it invites more scrutiny. Heat rose to Alice's cheeks. We haven't. There's no official relationship, she managed. I'm his housekeeper. Carolyn let out a mirthless laugh. I've seen how you two look at each other. You may not have named it, but it's as plain as day. Beatrice Webb and her circle have labeled it scandalous. If you two were to make it official, ironically, it could quell some of that scandal. A legitimate engagement or marriage is easier for society to swallow than uncertain cohabitation. The notion made Alice's heart pound. Marriage, we haven't even discussed. Carolyn snatched up a folded letter from the desk, scanning it. Sometimes practicality guides us to do what pride hesitates to allow. My brother's proud, but he's also passionate. If faced with losing you or losing the ranch's stability, I believe he'd risk everything. I'm asking you not to let him throw away his life's work. She stepped closer, voice dropping to a near whisper. I lost a younger brother to the war. Miss Harper. I thought I'd lost Benjamin too until he showed up with scars of his own, refusing the old path. I only want what's best for him, and if that includes you, so be it, but it must not destroy the ranch. Emotion clogged Alice's throat. She had steeled herself for condemnation, but instead found a sister desperate to protect her brother. I understand, she said quietly. Carolyn nodded, stepping back. Good. We'll meet the bankers tomorrow as a unified front. Meanwhile, talk to Benjamin. Let him know you'll support whichever approach is necessary. Perhaps you two can find a way to present your bond as a strength, not a weakness. That night, Alice roamed the ranch's quarters, unable to sleep. She recalled the conversation with Carolyn. Could it be true that an actual engagement might help rather than hinder them? The idea of marriage after her fiasco with Arnold Reed both thrilled and terrified her. She nearly jumped out of her skin when a soft knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Benjamin standing there in his shirt sleeves, hair tousled, as if he too had been pacing. I'm sorry it's late, he murmured, but we need to talk. She let him in, her heart drumming. They sat in her small sitting area, a single lamp casting dancing shadows. He confessed that Caroline had cornered him earlier, demanding an explanation for his attachment. He asked, voice trembling, do you regret coming here? Alice, I fear the town's rumors weigh heavily on you, and now my sister's making demands. She shook her head. I could never regret it, but I hate being the cause of strife. If there's a way to keep the ranch afloat to make your life easier. He reached for her hands. Gaze earnest. My life is better with you in it. Not easier, perhaps, but better in every sense. The ranch is important, but so is the woman who's taught me more about courage than any cavalry officer or war story. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the tension in the air like a taut string. Then Benjamin exhaled shakily. I have a proposition, though it might sound outrageous. You can refuse and I will respect it, but maybe we should marry. Her heart lurched. She had half expected it, yet hearing it aloud was surreal. He hurried on. I don't want you to think this is just about quelling rumors or appeasing Carolyn. I've felt something deep for you from the moment you stood up to those women in Winfield Flats. But maybe in formalizing our bond, we remove the scandal that everyone gossips about. We show the bankers we're stable, that Shaw's Crossing isn't some den of impropriety. His voice dropped, but only if you want it truly. I won't trap you with a marriage of convenience. If you'd prefer to go, I'll give you a fine reference and enough to start anew. Tears welled in Alice's eyes, partly from gratitude that he respected her freedom, partly from the overwhelming idea of marriage. She recalled the heartbreak of Arnold Reed's rejection and how different Benjamin was. She realized with sudden clarity that she loved him, scar gossip and all, but logic still pricked her, warning that a decision made in crisis might not be stable. I need time to think, she whispered. Relief and disappointment flickered across his face. Of course I'll wait as long as you need, he murmured. Gently squeezing her hands, he rose and slipped out as quietly as he'd come, leaving her to grapple with the possibility that her life might take a turn, both terrifying and wondrous. Early dawn found Shaw's Crossing in a flurry of preparation. Benjamin and Caroline dressed in their best traveling suits for the bank meeting, while a worried hush lay over the ranch. The staff knew the outcome of this meeting might shape their future expansions, purchasing new breeding stock, improving water lines, repairing fences. If the bankers turned them down, the ranch would stay afloat, but with far more struggle. And everyone knew the gossip swirling around Benjamin's relationship with his housekeeper could be used against him. Alice hovered by the courtyard, uncertain whether to wish them well or keep her distance. Carolyn approached first, her manner more cordial than it had been. Miss Harper, she said quietly. I've asked Benjamin if you'd come along, though you're not directly involved in the finances. The bank directors might see a sign of stability if you appear by his side. The alternative is letting them imagine you as some secret scandal. Would you mind? Surprise flickered through Alice. She hesitated. Are you sure it won't worsen the rumors? Carolyn shook her head. If it were purely my call, I'd use your presence as evidence that the household is respectable. We can say you're assisting with the ranch's domestic accounts. Frankly, I'm willing to try anything to keep them from focusing on petty judgments. Alice glanced at Benjamin, who was adjusting his tie by the stable. He offered a small, hopeful smile. The swirl of conflicting emotions threatened to unsteady her, but she nodded. If her presence might help, she would face the bankers. Parker readied the carriage, and soon the three of them embarked on the dusty road to Winfield Flats. The ride felt interminable. Caroline read ledger notes in pensive silence, while Benjamin kept a protective hand near Alice's seat as though aware of her tension. They arrived at the bank's imposing brick building to find the board of directors, four stern men in suits already seated. At the head was George Markham, a formidable figure who had known the Shaw family by reputation. He greeted them politely but wasted no time. We've heard conflicting reports about expansions at Shaw's Crossing, he began. We're open to providing the necessary funds, but certain concerns have come to light. His cold gaze flickered to Alice. A wave of anxiety spiked in her chest. Carolyn took the lead, diplomatically listing the ranch's assets, stable profits, and future potential. She wove a narrative of progressive ranching that had become the talk of the territory. Yet Markham zeroed in on the rumors. Mr. Shaw, your staff includes individuals of varied backgrounds. That's well enough. But we also hear whispers about your living arrangements. Some claim you keep a housekeeper under questionable circumstances. We prefer to lend to upstanding families, not chaotic enterprises. Heat flared in Benjamin's eyes. Your information is flawed. My staff is not chaotic. And Miss Harper runs the domestic accounts with more competence than any so-called society lady you could name. Another director leaned forward. Yet the columns in the local paper hint at impropriety. The bank invests conservatively. We question whether your personal entanglements might reflect poorly on your financial decisions. Caroline spoke next, eyes flashing. Let me clarify, Miss Harper's position is entirely respectable. She's elevated the ranch's efficiency beyond measure. If society columns prefer to spin salacious tales, that's hardly Mr. Shaw's fault. The board members muttered among themselves. Alice could sense their skepticism. She forced herself to speak up. Heart-thudding gentlemen, I maintain the ranch ledgers for daily household operations. I have them here, if you'd like to see the clarity of record-keeping. She pulled out a small binder, the product of months of meticulous work. This approach ensures minimal waste, optimal supply usage, and stable workforce. Morale. Markham flipped through the pages, impressed despite himself. This is thorough, he admitted. Another board member nodded. Quite professional. For a moment, it seemed as though they might focus on the ranch's strong numbers, but Markham couldn't resist a final jab. Yet the moral question persists. Are we to believe your closeness has no bearing on the finances? Benjamin bristled. What closeness? If you refer to the fact that Miss Harper and I share a professional respect. Yes, we do. If you're implying something base, I assure you we intend to formalize our commitment. Caroline inhaled sharply at Benjamin's direct mention of formalizing our own commitment. Alice's pulse hammered. Markham's brows rose. Formalize. Meaning marriage, Bridge. Casting a sidelong glance at Alice, Benjamin nodded. Yes, we're betrothed. That should dispel any notion of impropriety. The words hung in the air. A swirl of emotions, surprise, relief, a tinge of panic swept through Alice. She'd asked for time, yet here he was, publicly declaring an engagement. Did she resent him for forcing the issue? Oddly enough, no. She felt an unexpected sense of rightness, despite the shock of the moment. The board members exchanged glances. Markham cleared his throat. Well, that places a different light on matters. We prefer to see stable family structures. If you two are indeed engaged, perhaps this talk of scandal is overblown. Still, we must weigh all factors. He paused, returning to the ledger pages. Given the strength of your finances and Miss Harper's thorough documentation, we find your expansion request viable. The final approval remains contingent on a formal vote. Expect a decision within a week. Though not a definitive yes, it was hardly the rejection they'd feared. Stepping outside, the tension in the air between them crackled anew. Caroline discreetly drifted off to speak to an acquaintance, leaving Alice and Benjamin face to face on the bank steps. "You declared our engagement," Alice whispered, half-dazed. He exhaled slowly, a million apologies in his eyes. "I'm sorry I didn't plan to do it so abruptly, but the moment called for clarity. If you're upset," she pressed a trembling hand to his chest. "I'm not upset. I'm caught off guard," I said. "I needed time. But hearing you stand up for me, claim me as your fiancé, some part of me realized I want that." His face flickered with relief. "Truly," she nodded, tears prickling. "Yes. Let's see where this leads together." The city bustle ebbed around them, passers-by, stealing curious looks, including a few from Winfield Flats. She glimpsed shock, interest, perhaps even approval in some eyes. Right there on a dusty sidewalk, Benjamin Shaw gently took her hands and kissed her knuckles. "Then let's go home," he whispered. "We'll handle everything else one step at a time." News of the engagement spread like wildfire, fueled by tongues that had once denounced them. Now those same tongues found the story irresistibly romantic. How a wealthy rancher planned to marry the scarred housekeeper he'd championed. Beatrice Webb ironically busied herself planning a welcoming dinner for Caroline Hill and the prospective bride, as though she had always been on Alice's side. Meanwhile, staff at Shaw's Crossing celebrated, more openly relieved that society's condemnation might finally relent. Preparations for a wedding began almost by default, even before the bank's final decision arrived. Caroline worked behind the scenes, writing letters to secure a dress and certain supplies from more refined markets. Rosa Delgado fussed about the type of food appropriate for such an event. William Parker teased that they'd soon have a ranch full of quibbling ladies if matters didn't settle soon. Yet he wore a broad grin whenever he saw Alice calling her the new boss lady, which made her blush. Even Eduardo built a small arbor from mesquite wood to be placed by the orchard as a symbolic wedding arch. Alice, despite the swirl of activity, felt an undercurrent of anxiety. Late one afternoon, Carolyn found her in the library sorting through some old crates. "Looking for anything in particular?" Caroline asked. Alice confessed that she was searching for an old ring or piece of jewelry from the Shaw family, since she didn't have a ring of her own. Caroline rummaged through a trunk and produced a delicate gold band with a small sapphire cluster. "This belonged to our grandmother," she said. "She passed before the war. If Benjamin didn't mention it, it's probably because he thought it was lost." The ring's subtle beauty took Alice's breath away, but she hesitated. "Are you sure it's a family heirloom? What if you—" Ireland cut her off gently. "I have my mother's ring. This was set aside for Benjamin's wife. By tradition, the firstborn son inherits it." Touched, Alice cradled the ring, imagining the family lineage it represented. She thanked Caroline, who gave her a kind smile. "Be good to him," she murmured. "He's braved so much to keep this ranch and its ideals alive. He deserves happiness." The simple, heartfelt statement bridged the final gap between them, forging a genuine bond. Just when everything seemed to fall in place, an unwelcome letter appeared in the local paper, a final broadside from the few who despise seeing Shaw's Crossing flourish under improper influences. They insinuated that if the ranch's expansion hinged on a charity case marriage, it lacked genuine foundation. Staff read it with outrage, but Alice felt dread gnaw at her. "They won't stop, will they?" she asked Benjamin. He set the paper aside with disgust. "Let them talk." The bank's official answer arrives tomorrow. The next day, a messenger galloped up the dusty road with a letter from Markham and Associates. Breathless, he delivered it directly to Benjamin, who tore it open before the entire assembled staff. A hush fell as he scanned the page, tension etched across his face. Then he exhaled in relief, announcing, "They've approved the loan." A cheer went up among the workers. Rosa Delgado clapped her hands in delight. Parker high-fived Eduardo, and laughter mingled with the desert wind. Benjamin's eyes met Alice's from across the courtyard, a private smile passing between them that said, "We did it with that hurdle cleared." Wedding arrangements intensified. The orchard behind the main house was chosen as the ceremony location under the mesquite arbor and the new desert blossoms. Though it was not exactly the sort of lavish society wedding Carolyn might have known in San Francisco, it promised an authenticity that fit Shaw's Crossing better than any city chapel. Days Before the ceremony, an unexpected visitor arrived, Arnold Reed, the same man who once rejected Alice. He had business with Benjamin concerning supply lines and overcame his discomfort to apologize for his past cruelty. I misjudged you, he admitted quietly to Alice in front of Benjamin. I was so worried about my store's image that I forgot basic decency. She accepted the apology, gleaning a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. Then on the very eve of the wedding, a final test of adversity struck. A fierce windstorm battered the ranch, toppling some crates and scattering carefully arranged decorations. The orchard arbor wobbled but survived. While staff rushed to secure supplies, Alice found herself battling a wave of old nightmares. Memories of the fire that had scarred her face. She took refuge in the library, heart pounding there. Benjamin discovered her trembling. He knelt beside her, gently lifting her chin so she had to face him. "You're safe," he murmured. "This isn't that fire. We have plenty of help, and I won't let anything happen to you." She managed a shaky nod. The storm howled, but within his arms she felt anchored. "Sometimes the memories come back strong," she admitted. He stroked her hair with infinite tenderness. "Then let them wash over you and watch them fade. You've built a new life here. Those old ghosts have no power unless you give it to them." The sincerity in his voice renewed her, as though every tear she'd shed had prepared her for the possibility of genuine joy. By dawn, the windstorm subsided. Decor might be tattered, but the orchard itself stood firm, bathed in early sunlight. Parker hammered a few nails to steady the arbor. Eduardo rehung flowers, and Rosa oversaw last-minute meal changes. Carolyn, bleary-eyed, reported that, ironically, Winfield Flats residents were now praising the wedding as a grand event, with many planning to attend. Alice found that detail both amusing and humbling. These were the same people who once sneered at her. She resolved not to dwell on the shiftiness of human opinion, instead focusing on the vow she was about to take. On the morning of the wedding, a hush of expectancy settled over Shaw's Crossing. Despite the drama of the preceding months, the orchard transformed into a place of gentle beauty. Desert wildflowers mingling with carefully arranged roses. A freshly washed white cloth draped a makeshift altar near the mesquite arbor. Wooden benches stood ready for guests who began arriving in carriages and wagons. Among them, ironically, was Beatrice Webb, now sporting a beaming smile and praising the union she once denounced. The staff took it in stride, exchanging wry smiles. Inside the main house, Alice stood before a tall mirror that Rosa Delgado had polished to a gleaming shine. She wore a simple gown of pale ivory, altered by Rosa to fit her slender figure. The gentle slope of the collar revealed nothing scandalous, but enough to show she no longer hid from the world. Caroline fussed with a short veil, stepping back to admire the effect. The mirror reflected the scar that had once defined her in the eyes of strangers, but now its presence did not overshadow the light in her eyes. She felt a flutter of nerves interlaced with deep contentment. Mrs. Addison, who had traveled from Winfield Flats, stepped forward and squeezed Alice's hand. "There was a time I worried you'd vanish from that boarding house, never to be heard from again," she said, eyes misty. "Look at you now, found your place, found your heart," Alice thanked her softly. She then turned to Rosa Delgado, who'd been quietly adjusting the floral arrangement on Alice's wrist. "I can never repay what you've done for me." "Everyone here," Alice said, voice thick with emotion. Rosa patted her cheek. "Querida, you repay us by being happy. That's all we want." Music swelled outside, courtesy of a small band Parker had convinced to come from the next county. Caroline gave a nod. It was time. The walk from the house to the orchard felt both interminable and instantaneous. Guests rose when Alice emerged, each face turning to watch the bride pass. She caught glimpses of old acquaintances from town, ranch hands in their best attire, and well-wishers she hadn't even met. She saw Beatrice Webb pressing a handkerchief to suspiciously bright eyes, while Arnold Reed stood with a polite tilt to his head. At the arbor stood Benjamin Shaw, waiting with quiet anticipation. Dressed in a tailored vest and polished boots, he radiated an unassuming confidence. His gaze locked onto Alice the moment she stepped into view, and though dozens of onlookers surrounded them, she felt a sense of intimacy as profound as if they were alone. Beside him, William Parker served as best man with a proud grin. The officiant and itinerant preacher from a neighboring settlement signaled for hush. "Dearly beloved," he began, We gather to witness the union of Benjamin Shaw and Alice Harper, who stand before us to pledge their futures. A breeze stirred, carrying the orchard's scent of blossoms and desert soil. Benjamin reached for Alice's hands, calloused palms, cradling hers with gentle steadiness. Their vows were simple, heartfelt. He spoke of acceptance and second chances. How the ranch's mission to unify different people mirrored what he'd found with her. She spoke of resilience and shared courage, referencing how the desert had taught her that survival could bloom into something beautiful. When they exchanged rings, Carolyn presenting the Shaw heirloom to Alice. An undercurrent of murmurs ran through the crowd. Alice slid the gold band set with tiny sapphires onto her finger, a wave of wonder flooding her. Then the preacher invited them to seal the vows with a kiss. Benjamin leaned in, eyes never leaving hers until the final moment. The kiss was tender, unhurried, a promise made in front of a community that had once scorned them. Applause and cheers erupted as they parted, breathless smiles overtaking their faces. The subsequent celebration spilled over with a joy that transcended earlier tensions. Rosa's dishes graced long tables, enchiladas, roasted peppers, fresh tortillas, local vegetables. Meanwhile, Carolyn had insisted on a large cake frosted elegantly, which arrived intact despite the desert's heat. Folks from Winfield Flats mingled with ranch hands, forging unlikely friendships over good food and music. Even Beatrice Webb complimented Alice on her dress, half-jokingly lamenting she hadn't realized how lovely the girl was from the start. Late in the day after the big meal, Benjamin guided Alice away from the hubbub. They strolled along a quiet path that led to a little rise overlooking the property. From there they saw the orchard, the corral, the bunkhouse, and the main house, all alive with laughter and dancing. A swirl of pastel sky heralded the setting sun. "I've dreamt of a moment like this for years," Benjamin murmured, gently resting a hand at her waist. "Didn't think I'd ever truly have it." Alice pressed closer, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I was so afraid I'd never belong anywhere," she admitted. "Now I belong right here with you." He turned her to face him, love shining in his eyes, scars and all. He whispered, repeating a phrase that had once been a point of pity, but now stood as an emblem of triumph. "Scars and all," she echoed, full of gratitude for the man who saw beyond the surface. With that, he drew her in for a kiss under the painted sky, the desert wind drifting gently across them. And so it was that the once scorned mail-order bride, with a jagged scar on her cheek, found her true place in the sun. Through heartbreak and prejudice, she discovered not just acceptance, but a profound love that reshaped her self-image as surely as it redefined a ranch known for challenging convention. Over the coming years, Shaw's Crossing would expand, fulfilling the promise of that bank loan. But more importantly, it would stand as a testament that sometimes the best legacies are built by those who refuse to let the world's biases dictate their worth. In that orchard by the desert's edge, Alice and Benjamin Shaw charted a future that blended hope, resilience, and love into an unbreakable bond, scars and all. Reflecting on Alice and Benjamin's journey, it's clear how hope can bloom in life's harshest deserts. Their love isn't just a triumph over prejudice, it's a beacon for anyone who's ever been deemed unworthy. Where others saw only her scar, Benjamin saw indomitable spirit, and in guiding each other through despair and doubt, they unlocked a deeper legacy of acceptance. Over time, the ranch they built showed that real beauty shines from courage, compassion, and steadfast belief in someone's value. From my perspective, their story proves that true strength emerges when people look beyond appearances, extending kindness where others offer scorn. I'd love to hear your opinions. Which scene resonated most deeply with you? Do you think society can learn to set aside surface judgments? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep this uplifting discussion alive.